First item on the agenda is bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions today? Seeing none, we'll move on to a hearing. Our first hearing is on House Bill 2332, and it's requiring identification of a sender on third-party solicitations to register voters to file an application for an advance voting ballot. And Jason, do we have a staff briefing today? Mike, do you have a staff briefing? Welcome to the committee, Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Mike, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
We can. Mike, you want to give us a staff briefing? We can't see you yet, but go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got you on the. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. There's an echo. I apologize for that. I don't know what's going on. This bill is by Representative Hoffaker, and it deals with advanced voting ballots. And the gist of the amendments are on page 4 and 5. It provides that any person who solicits by mail a registered voter to file an application for advanced voting ballot and includes an application for the ballot with the mailing has to include on the exterior of the mailing certain information, the name of the individual organization that caused the mailing, the name of the executive director if it's an organization, the address, and a clear statement that this is not a government mailing, it's a private individual organization. The amendment specifically excludes the Secretary of State, any election official, or county election official, and the official protection and advocacy voting access agency under the federal law, and any other person, entity under federal law would be exempt. The violation of this is a Class C misdemeanor. It also provides that no person shall mail or possibly mail an application unless the person is a resident of the state of Kansas or is otherwise domiciled in the state. It provides any individual may file a complaint with the Attorney General, and it provides for a $20 civil penalty for each violation. If you've got questions, I'm trying to answer.
Are there any questions, Mike? Yes, we have two. Senator Faust-Godot.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so in this legislation, understanding the intent of it, how do we notify those outside of the state of Kansas who might send those mailers? How do we notify them?
Well, it's my understanding that groups keep track of what the laws are in the different states and so on, and they would have the responsibility to be aware of what the Kansas law is.
Okay, thank you. Senator Ware.
I'm just having a hard time deciphering all of his comments.
The audio in here today wasn't very well, so are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll move on to proponents. Representative Topliker, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm John Topliker, Representative 15th District. Yeah, it's too bad that we couldn't hear that a little bit better. And Mike, if you can hear me, your sound was kind of garbled, so whatever you can do to fix that. So I'll just, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll just kind of real quick go over some of these things again. So if you have a bill brief with you, supplemental note, what it does is it requires any individual who solicits by mail an application for an advanced voting ballot. Well, we know that happened quite a bit in this last election. There were a lot of people that were trying to get voters to fill out those advanced voting ballots so that your constituents and others around the state could actually receive a ballot at home. So, but what this does is it's basically I call it a disclosure bill, and it requires the name of the individual or organization causing the solicitation to be mailed. It names the president, CEO, or executive director, whatever the title is of the organization, requires that to be on the mailing, requires the address of that individual organization, and requires this statement on the mailing. Disclosure: this is not a government mailing. It is from a private individual or organization. Now, the reason why I've introduced this bill is because I wanted to try to address voter confusion, because comments were made that voters received some voters received as many as 9 ballot applications in the mail, and some even more. They didn't know, a lot of them thought that, okay, they all look like official looking voter applications for ballot, but which one do I fill out? So they ended up receiving sometimes 7 or 9 or more of these applications in the mail. So they had to call the county clerk or the election office and find out which one of these is the real one. Which one did you send me, or did you send any of them? And so what happened is a lot of them waited to the last minute, and some of them even actually made mistakes on their voter application, maybe left something off or whatever. And then it's too bad for them that then they were mailed a provisional ballot from the election office because they had left some required information off. So that, I'm just saying, that didn't necessarily happen a lot, but it did happen. And it was because of the confusion. So this bill, it's my hope that this bill, after requiring the identification of the sender, the clear identification of the sender, that it would, 1, address voter confusion, 2, provide clear identification of the sender of an application to a voter, and 3, reduce the number of provisional ballots, which can create an extra burden on election officials. I'll just, I think I'll leave it at that and probably just stand for questions. I mean, I think we addressed a lot of questions in committee. And if you can see in the supplemental note, you'll see that we did amendments to it. One was to address the Disability Rights Center of Kansas, who is an advocacy organization that helps with the Help America Vote Act. And so we heard in committee that they do have a mailing that they do with 16 pages sometimes of documents. In the middle of all these 16 pages, they usually put a application for advanced ballot in there. And so their concern was, well, we don't want to have to print all of these pages with this disclosure information. So we exempted out any quasi-governmental organization out of the requirement, so that if you are a governmental entity or an agency of the government, you do not, your organization is not required to put all of these things because you already are a governmental agency. And so it would be a moot point to put this on, to put this disclosure on there. So then we took out the County Clerks Association also said, well, you know, elected officials are people, and this is asking everyone to put a disclosure. And so the County Clerks Organization said, we would like to be exempt. And so we exempted them because clerks have to be candidates at some point, and they're people too. And so we exempted them out. Secretary of State exempt out. And let's see, what else do we do? Then there's a final provision at the end that if you're out of state, if you're an organization that's out of state, person or organization, and you want to mail in a bunch of advanced voter applications to voters in Kansas, this disallows that because you're an out-of-state organization, and you're prohibited from basically getting involved in the Kansas election and trying to mail advanced voter applications. So that was a provision that was added to the bill by the committee. All these were committee amendments, these last few issues that I'm talking about. And so in the end, I think I'm pretty sure everybody that showed up at the hearing was satisfied with what we did on the bill. And so I'm not sure if there's still opposition. There could be something new, but I'll stand for questions when you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
We have two questions, I think, on that side. Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still a little confused. They said some got 7 or 9 mailouts. Are these people asking to send for a advance ballot, or they're sending them ballots, or what was it?
Well, they're trying to help candidates vote at home. So they're just third-party organizations want to try to help get the vote out. And so they'll send out a mailing telling the voter that, hey, you can vote in advance if you just fill out this application. And then they'll send out the official state application for an advanced ballot. They'll send that out. But nowhere in the mailing does it have to say who they are, who they represent. So the voters get confused, and some of the voters we've heard actually think that they have to fill out one of these advanced voter applications or they won't be able to vote. You know how some people get confused. And so some thought, oh, well, if I don't fill this out, I won't be able to vote at all. I can't even go to the precinct and vote. So I have to fill this out. So some county clerks got the question from apparently quite a few people, what are all these and why am I getting them? And which one's the real one? And do I have to fill one out and the clerk say, no, you can vote in person. But it was addressed to me and it was all official looking and it said that if I wanted a ballot, I had to fill this out and I'm getting these over and over again in the mail. And I actually filled one or two of them out and I'm still getting them. So that's kind of the issue. And we think that this will clear it up. Like I say, the committee spent quite a bit of time on this in the House, and we think we have, at this point, possibly all questions resolved. But is there anything else? Or okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
we have another question from Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not so concerned about the in-state organizations, but what does this do to stop those that are from out of state? I mean, is there a penalty to them? I mean, what's to say that they're still going to do this since they're out of state?
That language is on page 5, and it begins basically on line 4. Oh, wait a minute. Official protection. No, it begins on line 14 on page 5. It is a Class C. Where am I? Yeah. Yeah, but that's where it starts. No person shall mail or cause to be mailed an application for an advanced voting ballot unless such person is a resident of the state or domiciled in the state. And then the penalty is on line 24 that any person, which is an organization, violates the provisions of this subsection, civil penalty of $20. And that's it. That's where it is in the bill. So,
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be considered an advanced voting application if the return address was somewhere other than the county commissioner's office, election commissioner's office, or county clerk's office?
So to understand your question, so an entity is mailing out an advanced voter application, and you're asking if they don't mail it into the election office, if they're mailing it somewhere else, and you're asking if that is an official?
My situation, I'm wondering if it would be considered an advanced application. I had at least 4 different ones mailed into my district. They looked the same as the Sedgwick County official one, with the exception of the return address. The return address on one was North Carolina, one was in Missouri, one was a P.O. box, and one was the official one. I'm wondering if those other ones would be considered an application for an advanced ballot when it's going to an out-of-state address. Would it still be considered an application?
Yes, it would, because there's a separate statute in law that outlines exactly what the advanced voter application should be. And of course, since wherever you are in the state, the address would be different to 105 different county clerks, you know, or election offices. You can't put that on the application, so the address probably is separate. So yeah, those were probably currently legal.
I know they'd be currently legal, but you're returning that application to North Carolina. That's probably not going back to the Sedgwick County, in my case, office.
Right, and this disallows that, because you cannot be an out-of-state organization. You have to be domiciled or a resident of Kansas in order to
So a person in Kansas could mail an application and the return address could be to another state?
I think so right now.
In this bill, could they?
No, not in this bill, because this bill, Oh, are you saying that if you're a Kansas organization or resident and you're asking someone to fill out an advance application, are you asking
Mailing
them?
it out of state. That happened in my race.
Yeah, I think this still allows that to happen. I think it still allows it to happen. But this bill here makes it so that in 14-point font, a clear disclosure that this is not a government mailing. You'll see it in the bill.
I like the concepts of the bill, sir. I just want to be sure it would be considered an application if it wasn't going back to the county election office.
Well, I think it is, but it would have to, according to this bill, it would have to have the disclosure in 14-point font on every single page of the mailing, except for the application. It would say, disclosure, this is not a government mailing. It is from a private individual or organization who have to have their name, address, all their identification on there. And so if they are from Kansas, I guess they would have their Kansas information on the mailing. Now, I would think, I mean, you never know what people are going to do when they get a mailing like that. I would think that most people would be suspicious and go, why am I filling this out from somebody's trying to help me out to get a ballot at home? Why am I filling this out and then I'm sending it to another state? You know, I think that most people would question that up front and say, should I fill this one out or not? And but this just doesn't disallow that. Now, Mr. Chairman, I would, if we can hear the revisor, I would like to get his input into the senator's question if he's still.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Chairman? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I apologize for the earlier, not sure exactly why there was an echo, but anyway, I think we probably ought to maybe clarify the bill a little bit to address Senator Peterson's concern. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for the legislation. I think the major intent of the legislation is good, something that we need. As a longtime member of the the previous name was the Senate Ethics and Elections Committee, serving on that committee, and now it's been changed to transparency and ethics, or ethics and transparency. But so having a little knowledge of this issue and receiving a lot of the ballots, as Senator Peterson, I reside in Sedgwick County too, and across the state of Kansas, I heard, this situation was happening. So thank you for bringing the legislation. And I personally wish we would go back to the day when the only people that would receive an advance ballot were those who were disabled, who had provided an application from their physician to the Elections Commission, and then they would automatically get an advance ballot in the mail and send back. And then we allowed it for those in the military to get that advance ballot, and then other people who might be on vacation or whatever the case might be, not here in person to go to the poll and vote, or early vote, or whatever their county allowed, is that that individual voter would have to submit an application to the election office on their own themselves. They'd have to initiate that advance ballot being mailed to their home. They would have to do that, and then they get it. And so it was just kind of that one-time deal. And then we, the legislature, wanted to make it easier for people, and so we allowed our county commissions to just mail these applications out. And just that alone has been confusing to my constituents. They think that once they fill that out, they've already voted, and then some forget to do that. They go to the polls and the provisional ballots and all that. So I appreciate your attempting to do this. And so on the same line of questioning, though, of Senator Peterson, if I'm correct, so automatically the voter would, hopefully they'd see that they're returning it to an out-of-state address. And so hopefully they won't do that. But perhaps in the bill, we could clear it up to fix that. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But I still have the concern of how do we notify, how do we penalize those in other states? Because they were the ones who were mailing the multiple advance ballot applications to individuals who then became confused. But that's the piece I would really want to address, is how do we, $20 is per piece. Okay, oh, that's good, that's better. Okay, then I'm good with that. Yeah, thank you.
That was put on by the committee onto the bill, so that they had a concern with that, so. Right, yeah.
Any further questions? Not, thank you very much. We do have neutral. Katie Copel, District Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. And Katie, are you online?
Yes, sir.
Good, well, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee and Chairman Alley. I'm Katie Copel, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Communications and Policy. We are neutral on this bill, as with most other bills not introduced by our office. However, we do believe that House Bill 2332 nicely addresses growing concerns with voter information in Kansas. It is not uncommon for third parties to engage in voter outreach efforts. Nothing prevents them from doing so, and most are sincere in their efforts to encourage voter participation. We will note that in 2020, we did see a noticeable uptick in third-party mailings, and we found that there are generally three key issues with these efforts. The first is that third-party forms may not always collect the information required by state law, making the document incomplete. Most commonly, it's a lack of signature or voter identification. Second, voters, as we've mentioned, as already has been discussed in great detail, is a lot of voters receive multiple advanced by mail ballot applications from third parties, even after they already submitted one in 2020. This created a lot of voter confusion and concern, and it also created a dramatic workload increase for local election offices who have to process duplicate forms just to make sure the information is up to date. And so this caused a tremendous workload on them, also while they were preparing for a major election in the middle of a global pandemic. And then the third issue is with voter data. State law does not prohibit third parties from retaining personal information for data collection purposes. Some of the advanced by mail ballot mailings, as Senator Peterson and others have mentioned, did have return addresses of the organization and not the county election office. And I will note that county election offices are responsible for handling ballot applications, advanced by mail ballots, and also voter registration forms. Our office does not handle any of those. So with that, we throughout 2020, we encourage voters, if they got a mailing from a third party, to just throw it away. And we will continue to do that, and also encourage voters to utilize their local election offices to complete their election-related transactions. With that, I'm happy to stand for questions. And again, we do appreciate your consideration of this issue.
Thank you, Katie. Have any questions for Katie? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are any other neutral? We do have an opponent, Mr. Davis Hamlet from the Loud Light Civic Actions. David, are you on? Davis, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Alley and members of the committee. This is a very similar proposal to SB 209 that most of y'all heard 3 weeks ago. I've been neutral on most of these bills. However, how this bill was altered made me an opponent today, not for lack of trying by Representative Topflicker, who I'm thankful for several amendments that he did make to address some concerns. But there were also some amendments made by other members of the committee that raised new concerns about this bill. First, I just want to say, like, the spirit of the law of this is fine. The intention behind this is fine, but I think the devil is in the details. And I think we need to ask ourselves, what is the clearly defined problem? And is this a carefully crafted solution to that problem? And I'd argue it's really not. First off, most of the mailers already would have complied generally with this. The bigger issue we have is really how chaotic the last election was, but that was because of the lack of statewide standards, the fact that some counties were sending out applications, some were not, and the lack of, and really the outdated election infrastructure that Kansas has. We had hundreds of thousands of applications in backlog. So if you got these mailers in an ideal world, you'd just be able to look yourself up online and see if you already applied. But because Kansas does not have any official online way to apply for a mail ballot that is integrated with the voter system, and we do not make heavy investments into the processing of mail ballot infrastructure, this was actually months behind, and some people's applications and even voter registrations were not being processed until the day before the election. So that, I would argue, is actually the more proper route to go. And also counties have asked for semi-permanent mail ballot status for anyone who's interested. So again, they don't have to process hundreds of thousands of routine applications for people who want to vote by mail every single election. The big concern, though, that was added by amendment was actually the section L, which makes it so that both the person soliciting the mailer has to be a resident of Kansas and the vendor that is printing the mailer. And when this was discussed, this was amended on, while the committee was working the bill at the very end of the day. And even as the committee was discussing it, they weren't sure exactly how this would be applied and who it would apply to. And beyond it having to be both the person and the vendor, there was questions about if it would apply to where the mailing is printed. And then I actually have a question, which I haven't been able to get an answer for, which is this even constitutional? Because essentially what it is doing is it blocks Kansas citizens from legally engaging with business and with out-of-state mailing vendors. So if you wanted to hire a Oklahoma City vendor to send out this mailer right now, this appears to be illegal, and they could amass huge fines for that. And also the level of specificity in this is concerning because it has things like requiring 14-point font. With all the details that have to be included, this would mean about a fourth of the front of an envelope would just be text with these disclosures. And it would also mean that if you decided to use, for example, 13.5% font, you would have committed a crime. And that level of specificity being encoded in statute is concerning. It seems like a more proper place would be rules and regulations or just guidance from counties. So with that, I would just encourage this committee to be very limited in how it responds in this capacity, because I actually don't think this addresses any of the problems that we're really discussing. I think this is kind of a simple solution that won't necessarily do anything, and it might create legal problems, compliance problems, charge people with crimes for just minor mistakes, and potentially create constitutional issues with interstate commerce. And with that, thank you for listening to my testimony, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Davis. Say that again, what you said about the font.
How the bill is written is it requires 14-point font on both the envelope and on every page of the bill That includes the name of the organization, the organization's address, the executive director or president of the organization, and a disclosure that's a sentence about how it's not from a government mailer. And that has to be not just on the envelope, but on every page within the envelope in 14-point font.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there any other opponents? And we did not receive any written testimony on this bill. If not, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2332 and open the hearing on Senate Bill 292, and it is limiting who may return an advance voting ballot and the number of such ballots in a person may return. And we need a staff briefing. And Mike, could you give us a briefing on that bill, please?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what this bill does is it says that no person shall knowingly transmit or deliver an advance voting ballot to the county election officer polling place on behalf of a voter who is not the voter themselves, unless the person submits a written statement that they have to sign and the voter has to sign as well. And it's a sworn statement that they've not exercised undue influence over the voter, and they cannot return more than 5 advance ballots. And the voter themselves has to affirm that they have authorized this person to return the ballot and that they have not been unduly influenced. It makes this violation of this statute a class non-person felony to level 9, which would be basically presumptive probation, but a felony. 5 to 7 months is the minimum, and it would be maybe a year and a half or so for if you got a couple of person felonies as a basically criminal question would be unusual. Anyway, if you got any questions, I will try and answer them. There's amendments of 2 different statutes dealing with advanced ballots to make them conform to these provisions.
Any questions for Mike? Seeing none, thank you, Michael. First proponent is Stephen Green II with Opportunity Solutions Project. Stephen, welcome to committee.
Good morning, Chairman Alley and members of the committee. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to provide proponent testimony on Senate Bill 292. And also, I represent Opportunity Solutions Project. It's a nonprofit organization that advocates for state and federal policies that promote free and fair elections across the country. Also by my side today, I have Mr. Ryan Kriegshauser, who's a partner with Kriegshauser and Nye Law. Previously, Mr. Kriegshauser served as Deputy Secretary of the State of Kansas Secretary of State's office and is a subject matter expert and specifically pertaining to election laws here in Kansas. And so he'll have an opportunity to defer any sort of detailed questions. I'll defer to Mr. Kriegshauser about the legislation before you today. You do have my testimony before you, which outlines the key components of Senate Bill 292. We really believe at the heart that this is proactive legislation that clearly indicates a voter's intent while creating also a bright line for how advanced ballots are to be completed. At this point, if I could, Mr. Chair, I would like to turn it to Mr. Kriegshauser. He can explain a court case or Kansas Supreme Court ruling that really provides a good context for why we think Senate Bill 292 is needed.
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name's Ryan Kriegshauser. I was Deputy Secretary of State at the Secretary of State's office for a number of years, and I've been engaged in election law practice here for a number of years, doing election contests and other election-related matters. And so the case that that Mr. Green brought up was the Curie decision back in 1998, where the Kansas Supreme Court analyzed, it was actually in the context of an election contest, And the contesting party brought forward, I think the margin was about 22 votes, and a majority of the votes that were being contested were people who gave assistance to voters who didn't have a disability. They were just, normal folks, and the court looked at the law and said, in certain situations where people have a disability and they need to have assistance, of course, the law provides for that. But they said in this situation, there wasn't a specific prohibition from a third party actually inserting themselves when that disability didn't exist. And they said it did consist of a technical violation, but due to the doctrine of substantial compliance and just generally how elections work in general, they decided not to take those votes out of consideration and said even though it's a technical violation, essentially there's no prohibition, so they were going to allow it. And what that has created in the state of Kansas is basically the ability of third parties to provide assistance to voter when they don't have a disability. And this is in the context of ballot harvesting is really what the bill is trying to get at. Is we have seen across the country, actually in 2018, there was a situation in North Carolina, I think it was the 9th Congressional District, where there was pervasive ballot harvesting such that a candidate actually ended up withdrawing their name because of the amount of ballot harvesting that was involved in that situation. And so we are seeing this across the country, this ballot harvesting where a third party comes through and picks up and actually transmits the ballot from the voter theoretically to the election office. And the current concern with that is, do they turn in those ballots? What do they do with it? Do they selectively only turn in certain ballots? I think of it as, would I give a check to pay my utility bills to a perfect stranger and just hope that they go and turn that in without any kind of accountability? But that's essentially what current law allows. And about a majority of the states, including Kansas, allow third parties to turn in ballots, actual ballots. So these are voted ballots completed by the voter and then taken by a third party, theoretically, to the election office. And so what this would do is provide accountability and transparency and a chain of custody for that ballot. The voter would have to knowingly give permission for this third party to transmit their ballot, know who that person is, and then there's accountability on the other side when that third party turns in the ballot. And what this bill has done is use the procedure that's already used by third party assistance voting. And so if you see, this is an example of a mail ballot, actually. It already has signature lines for people who assist voters. And so this would probably just include the creation of a third checkbox that has the same affirmations of someone providing assistance to a voter with a disability. It's just an additional option for a voter to say, I have this person transmitting my ballot to the election office. They have not exerted any undue influence over me, and I acknowledge that they have my ballot, and then that person transmitting the ballot would also affirm that they had received the ballot. And so we're just trying to provide, in a situation, and there are many states that don't allow ballot harvesting at all. They just do not allow third parties to take ballots from a voter to the election office. We've tried to reach a middle ground where we allow a person to deliver up to 5 ballots. Some states say only people who reside in the same household can deliver ballots, be third parties that deliver ballots. So we're trying to reach a balance where the focus is more disclosure and transparency and having a voter know who is actually transmitting their ballots. So. And a big reason for that is that Curie decision, because right now under Kansas law, it's even though it says only folks with disabilities can have third parties assist them, the Supreme Court has said anyone can assist any voter. It might be a technical violation, but there's no direct prohibition. This would make it a direct prohibition and clarify the law. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Question is, did you turn in written testimony?
No, Mr. Green did.
Sorry. Yes, sir. I turned in testimony. Mr. Krieghauser is a client, it works for us on behalf of Opportunity Solutions Project and was going to offer more technical explanation for why Senate Bill 292 was something that we supported.
So in the future, we just require
Okay.
written testimony. So thank you very much. Is there any questions? Yes, Senator Fouts-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing up that point, because I was looking through my package trying to follow what you were saying so that I could be able to refer back if we decide to work this bill. So, but to your point, when you mentioned 5 ballots, advanced ballots being delivered by this third person, how in the heck is the election office going to verify that? Are they now going to have to hire more people? You know, how do we verify that? And Mr. Chairman, as a African American and my mother and others, you know, wanting to make voting easier and upholding democracy, and some things you said I actually agree with, some I don't, because I know when we do this in the district that I represent, that individual with that advanced ballot, the people that might come and pick up the ballot from that 80-year-old woman who has outlived her spouse and her children, and maybe she doesn't have other relatives. She's been ill. She's been in the rehab center. She's not been able to get out of the house and get a stamp to mail back her advanced ballot. So the people that come to the door, she usually, sometimes they initiate that call. They'll call the election office or they'll call their party chair and say, can someone come and pick them up? And they already do that someone of authorization. But how, why do we want to, in my district, people who get these ballots, some of them don't have cars. Our Wichita transit system doesn't run on a regular basis like that. So I want you to tell me, so, and if they accidentally pick up 6 as opposed to that, I mean, I just have not seen a major problem of this. And Mr. Chairman, you know, as I said, since I've been in the legislature since midterm in '03, I've served on the House committee, election committee, and in the Senate. And so I just have not seen this be a major problem. But tell me, what do we do about the 80-year-old woman? And yeah, and
No, happy to, and those are excellent points. And just to clarify, yeah, my apologies for not putting my name on the testimony. It was Mr. Green's testimony. It just happens to have legal subject matter in it, so I'm here to assist him and answer those questions, so my apologies. Next time, I'll make sure my name's on the testimony as well. And there, you had a few questions there, Senator. I think the first thing with the verification, and the intent here is it's an affidavit. The person making the representation, it's, you know, there's a lot of areas in the law, taxes being one of them, where, you know, the government by and large, they do audits, but oftentimes when you submit your tax returns, there's a trust, a level of trust there. Now it's a crime if you commit tax fraud, and the same would be true here. But it wouldn't necessarily require the election office to go and verify that they've only delivered 5, although that would be possible. In retrospect, you could go and see, well, Ryan Kriegshauser delivered 6 ballots. His name is on 6 ballots. So you could audit that. And so if they wanted to, they could get that kind of verification, but it's not required. It's really on the individual collecting the ballots to know how many ballots they've collected. And what this is targeted to is the widespread efforts. I think there was a situation that became public in Minnesota where this ballot harvesting method was used for hundreds of ballots, whole buildings. And I think that's the target, is to prevent third parties from picking and choosing whose ballots they pick up on a mass scale, and not the 80-year-old individual that you're discussing. Mm-hmm. But that person has multiple ways of
and
getting
thank you. I know time is running. Sure. Mr. Chairman, just one more quick question. So usually, we don't have our Secretary of State here. We don't have my commissioner in Sedgwick County, but usually when those ballots are picked up like that and delivered, there's usually some verification already existing in law, Mr. Chairman. But I want to ask you this finally. In 2020, our Secretary of State's office approved boxes for people to drop off ballots. How would this law affect current law and what is already allowed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So an individual could use one of those drop boxes, but because of the additional verifications, the person would actually have to drop off the ballots in person. But if an individual voter wanted to use a drop box, of course, it wouldn't prevent that.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, this concerns me of that signature verification part for those with disabilities. Even myself, Mr. Chairman, years ago when I was practicing cheerleading jump, I broke my wrist. And so when the weather changes and when the plate and 4 screws that are in my wrist, sometimes my handwriting changes quite often as those with disabilities. So that would be concerning to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. One question that I've thought of is, so the helpful person is not harvesting, but helping a voter and picking up several of the neighbors' votes and, you know, delivering them for them. And then, oops, they missed one. So what happens with that 6th vote? And does the voter's vote still count? Is there a question in that? Is that spelled out so that we really understand?
Right, and I think, so the actual verification is on the ballot envelope, or conceivably would be. And so each of those 6 ballots would have separate verifications on each of the ballots. So that 6th ballot, I mean, it would be the same verification as the previous 5, if that makes sense to you. And as far as whether or not the ballot would count, I think given the Curie decision, what courts try and do is ascertain voter intent. And so if a third party messes up, and this happens in the context of election administration, sometimes government officials don't do something right according to election administration. And the courts have said generally, unless that is widespread and we cannot ascertain the intent of the voters, then, you know, there has to be give in the joints for elections to work. None of them are perfect. And so I think the same would apply here. And a court looking at that, although it would be in the context of a contest, you know, a court would probably make that same analysis and probably count the vote if the third party was the person who made the mistake.
Okay. One more question, if that's okay. It almost sounds like you would be more comfortable if we just didn't use mail-in ballots, except for the most extreme situations.
No, I think this bill actually pushes people to mail in their ballots, and the third parties collecting ballots that are not government officials, I think, is the problem. And the bill, I think, has a few provisions in it that say, if you can mail it in, use the Postal Service, and that is totally allowed and in some ways preferred. And so I think the bill actually contemplates that more people should use the mail system. What we don't want is third parties who are not government officials going around and picking up hundreds of ballots. That just limit it to 5, the situation where there's a handful of people who don't have the means to get their ballot in. They, for whatever reason, have missed the opportunity to mail their ballot in, or they have concerns about the mailing process. Then a person could go get a handful of ballots, and that's okay. That's not what we're trying to prevent here. It's the organized, systemic, just a system of trying to collect these ballots en masse that lends itself to, you know, possible issues.
One more, is it okay? Okay, sorry. So what about, and now I lost my squirrel. Okay, never mind.
Well, if it comes back.
You talked too long for me. This really almost smacks of voter suppression to me.
Well, that's obviously not the intent. It's to prevent people en masse collecting ballots who aren't government officials, and just to maintain that security and chain of custody. That is the intent.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Opponents, we have Michael Papa with the Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition, and he's on remote. Michael?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear virtually before you today. We've also submitted written testimony for your review. Mainstream Coalition opposes SB 292, limiting the delivery of advanced ballots. Mainstream is a nonpartisan Kansas grassroots advocacy organization. We're dedicated to creating a more representative and responsive government by empowering informed participation and meaningful action in the political process. We envision a Kansas political system that represents all of its constituents, and that begins with voting. Honestly, we don't understand why this bill is being heard. After the 2020 elections, the Secretary of State's office reported no widespread systematic issues with voter fraud. And Secretary Schwab himself testified in committee that, quote, "We don't need a drastic change in our election law." We do applaud efforts to protect our elections, including the chain of custody that's already in place. However, the additional clause to limit the number of advanced ballots a person may transmit on behalf of others would be a drastic change. And it would disenfranchise Kansans and restrict our ability to vote and have that vote counted, which is central to our democracy. We see this as a harmful solution looking for a problem that just doesn't exist. We ask you to please oppose SB 292 and instead invest time and energy into crafting legislation that makes voting more accessible and equitable for all Kansans. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We have as second opponent, Mr. David Hamlet with the Loud Light Civic Actions. Davis?
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman Alley and members of the committee. There is a lot with this, so I'm trying to think of exactly where to start. I do want to first point out, as the proponents even said, this is not a documented problem in Kansas. First off, this is not addressing any known issue that has occurred in this state. This is based on things that happen in other states with different laws, with different procedures. And so I think that's important to note that this is literally not applicable to any known bad thing that has happened in our state. So with that, it would, however, create a variety of problems. Specifically, it makes it so you can assist voters, but once you assist more than 5, you have committed a felony crime. That is a severe thing. So you're just the 6th person you help, all of a sudden you lose your right to vote. You could go to jail. There is, again, no problem for this. This solution isn't really crafted to fix anything. Whenever we talk about the chain of custody, already the person assisting someone has to get approval from the voter, and there's a checkbox on the envelope, and then both the voter and the person assisting them signs and writes their name on the envelope. These are already documented things. Anything bad that could happen in the mail voting process is already illegal. If someone says they will assist you and they do not return your mail ballot, that is a crime. If someone tries to influence how you're voting on your ballot, that is a crime. If you open the mail ballot to see how that person voted, that is a crime. The only thing this will do is make it a crime to properly and dutifully help and fulfill your obligation to your neighbor. That is the only thing this will criminalize. So as far as unintended consequences of this, in 2020, the Secretary of State reported 92% of people who requested mail ballots got them turned in. Many of them were assisted by other voters. When it comes to concerns of enforcement, already if we have concerns about people improperly influencing or not returning mail ballots, these are all public records. The district attorney, the attorney general, even you could go through and find the group of people who did not return their mail ballots and contact them and ask them, did someone come and take your ballot, and begin an investigation into that. So we already have enforcement mechanisms if this was a problem. We already have a way to track the chain of custody. And yeah, I mean, really, I don't know how to say it enough. There really is nothing this does except for creates new crimes and potentially has a chilling effect on people being willing to help their neighbors. I know there are a couple instances, which I hope people, some other opponents will be giving testimony on. I know one of the written opponents that are written only, I want to highlight was the nuns of Concordia in their sister house. They have essentially a group that is delegated to help all the other nuns ensure they get their ballots in. And now you actually face a situation where y'all might begin criminal prosecution of nuns for helping their fellow nuns get their ballots in. There are so many unintended consequences that we do not know about. I've just heard about 5 or 6 versions of like these kind of stories of people in group living situations or unique circumstances who would be impacted this. So with that, I just say this is really not just a solution in search of a problem. It's actually voter suppression in search of some sort of justification. And finally, this is actually an issue that's being litigated in the US Supreme Court. And even as the previous attorney said, this would, even figuring out some of these details would probably immediately require legal intervention. I don't know why y'all would seek to open up all these legal questions for a problem that doesn't exist. So with that, thank you for hearing my testimony, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator ks.gov.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, Davis, you brought up a point. So I represent a lot of facilities with senior citizens who are in nursing homes, rehab centers, and they all vote by mail ballot, and somebody has to come and pick them up. And so that would be terrible to have to send 10 people just to pick up 5. So do you know in this legislation, the signature required, would that be have to be on the inside of the envelope or on the outside of the envelope? Because as I said, we are, as you pointed out, thank you for answering my previous question, there's already a verification of signature by the person delivering the advance ballot and the other person. That's already in law. And so, yeah, that's my question, if you remember it. Thank you.
So the signature, the information is on the outside of the envelope. So the reason for that is that your ballot that you actually vote is a completely separate thing, and it has no identifying documentation on it. And then that ballot is put on in the envelope, and on the outside of the envelope is where both the voter would sign, and if they're being assisted, they would check a box saying, I'm asking this person to assist me, and then the person assisting them would sign their name and write their name. So that is all on the outside of the envelope. And as you mentioned, not only could it be a problem in group settings for asking multiple people to help, that's assuming there are multiple people to help. You obviously have rural group home living situations where there might only be 1 or 2 people able to assist the group. And so you might actually have a group of voters where they have to decide who gets to have their vote returned, which is incredibly concerning. So thank you for your question.
Are there any further questions? I have one. You brought up something there, Davis. Could they not just put a stamp on and mail it?
So this is actually, I believe that the Disability Rights Center will be giving testimony, and so they might be better fit to discuss this. But you know that assumes that there's certain access, both of like having stamps and stuff, but also that assumes you have limbs that you have arms that you can put the stamp on the envelope, right? We have people in various disability group living situations who need this level of assistance and wouldn't be able to do those things like put a stamp on it. And then actually what I did not mention, but this lends itself to, is the Secretary of State, and we all know mail is actually slow right now. That is documented in federal testimony by the Post Service. We know mail is running slow. So essentially, for some people, you're forcing them to use mail instead of use the more reliable method of having someone they trust to turn it in.
Thank you very much. Senator ks.gov.
Mr. Chairman, this is in response to your question. So seriously, that sounds so simple and easy to the average person, just to put a stamp on it and drop it in the mailbox. But actually, Mr. Chairman, I have senior citizens who don't drive anymore and they're homebound sometimes, they actually will put like $20 in their mailbox, or not in their mailbox, but on an envelope under the porch or somewhere. And then I go buy them a book of stamps just so that they can mail off their, bills and things like that. It's a difficult process just for some of them to get a stamp. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. With that, I call your attention to the opponent written testimony. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I do want to, Mr. Burgess, are you here? Mr. Burgess, you didn't turn in a transmission form, and so therefore we're going to leave you as written for today. And
Sorry about that. I left a voicemail asking what all else I needed to say.
well, yeah, well, we're behind schedule already, and so we're leaving you as written, so that, what we have to do to make sure it's right. Okay, so with that, we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 292, and we will take Senate Bill 293 tomorrow. So realize that some of you may not be able to come back tomorrow. If you can, we definitely appreciate it, but we're running behind schedule today. So thank you very much, and the meeting concludes.